Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday to you. My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock. It's time for 10 with Tim. It's been a good week in the Word, hasn't it? And it's the end of a good week in the Word. We're in Numbers chapter 20. Just going to do the first 13 verses because this is a pretty consequential story here where Moses strikes the rock, and I think we need to talk about it. But are you doing okay? Are you good? Have you had a good week? I think finally the sun is out. I think the rain is over. In about 3 weeks, we're going to be saying, "Oh, I wish it would rain." But I'm so glad it's quit raining. I'm ready for some sunshine. I know some of you don't want to get hot. I'm ready to get hot. I just love summer, and we haven't had any summer yet. So anyway, it's my time of year. I'm excited. Moses strikes the rock in Numbers chapter 20. Let's talk about it. All right, first off, I think one of the things that it's hard to realize when you hit Numbers chapter 20 is that nearly 40 years have gone by. I think you lose that. Now, I'll be the first to say, sometimes in reading Numbers, I think it feels like 40 years that we've been trying to get through Numbers. Numbers has some long dry stretches, but it's been 40 years. We know this for several reasons. First off, we know that they're back at Kadesh. Verse 1, they arrived in the wilderness of Zin and camped at Kadesh. That's where they started. Remember, they started in Kadesh, and then they had to wander for 40 years, and now they're back in Kadesh. And so that's the first clue. Second, Miriam dies, and then Aaron's going to die tomorrow. I mean, he's going to die when we pick up in the rest of chapter 20. So that generation that was supposed to fall dead in the wilderness before they could see the promised land, that generation is all dropping. And so Miriam dies, Aaron dies, and then we're going to make a beeline into the promised land. So basically 40 years have gone by. I just didn't want you to miss that because I think that's fairly significant. I mentioned Miriam dies, of course, and then the people begin to complain. And we are in the wilderness of Zin here at the place called Meribah, which means arguing. The people begin to argue and complain. Nothing new there. And they complain that there's no water to drink. You brought us out in this place. We got no grain. We got no figs. We got no pomegranates. No water to drink. And so Moses and Aaron fall face down as they do. They go before the Lord. And there the Lord appears to them. Now, it's really interesting. You and Aaron, this is God's instructions, verse 8. You and Aaron must take the staff and assemble the entire community as the people watch. Speak to the rock over there, and it will pour out its water. Take the staff and speak to the rock. Now, several interesting things. First off, this isn't the first time this sort of thing happened. It happened in Exodus chapter 17, and I encourage you to turn there. Exodus chapter 17, at the beginning of the sojourn. This is right after they leave Egypt. In Exodus chapter 17, so it's like 40 years ago, the same sort of thing happens. Do you remember that? And in that instance, the Lord says, Exodus chapter 17, verse 5, walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used, to open to strike the waters of the Nile, stand before the rock at Mount Sinai, strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. So 40 years ago, God said, strike the rock. And so Moses strikes the rock and water gushes out. Now, 40 years later, it's a very similar situation, only this time, take your staff and speak to the rock. Now, interesting little tidbit. In Jewish tradition, I think the Midrash or the Mishnah, I don't know. In Jewish tradition, the rabbis began to teach that somehow this rock followed them. So it's like the same rock. And either they're just carrying it, and it's like this big old, igloo cooler that always, manages to pump out water. And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul mentions it. And Paul seems to assume, or at least Paul goes along with the tradition that the rock followed. Remember that? Because 1 Corinthians says, and they all drank the same water from the rock that followed them in the wilderness. So again, the rabbis began to teach that they took this rock with them, and it became this limitless supply of water. And so it's like the same rock. That sounds so dumb to me. Like, how big is this rock? I mean, I guess if it's like, manageable size, but it doesn't make any sense. And Paul says it traveled with them, so like it just rolls along behind them. And literally, some of the rabbis taught that the rock just sort of, came with them. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. The rabbis may have believed that. I think Paul probably refers to the tradition to make his point about Jesus, but I'm not sure Paul believes it either. I mean, that just, this rock that just rolls, with them. I don't think so. I don't think we're supposed to deduce that from these two references. But it is interesting that the same sort of episode and the same sort of solution occurs, in the beginning at Sinai, and then here at the end, right here at the cusp of the promised land. I personally don't believe it's the same rock rolling along with them, but whatever. That's not really the point of this story. The point of the story is God says, take your staff, but speak to the rock. First time, strike the rock. That was 40 years ago. Now speak to the rock. But Moses does a really strange thing. He takes the staff from the place where it's kept before the Lord. He and Aaron summoned the people to come and gather at the rock. And he said, listen, you rebels. And then, must we bring water from this rock? And then he hits it twice. He raises his hand, strikes the rock twice with the staff, and the water gushes out. So God provides the water, but then consequences for Aaron and Moses, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people. You'll not lead them into the land I'm giving them. And the place is named Meribah, which means arguing. That's just so interesting. And I know for a lot of us, it's like, gosh, that's harsh, Lord. Moses, I mean, if anybody deserves to go into the promised land, wouldn't it be Moses? And again, I know there's more to that story, and I've talked about it before. I won't get into it today. But what, I mean, gosh, it's just such a small thing. And it just seems like such a small thing. Strike the rock, speak to the rock, whatever. The people get their water, But honestly, none of that's the point. I think some of this highlights the responsibility of leadership. Moses speaks to God, and Moses represents God to these people. And in this moment, when God would want them to see a merciful God who provides for his people despite their sin, I mean, that's what God is doing. Instead, what they see is this, exhausted leader. I mean, I get it. I get leadership fatigue. I haven't had a day off in weeks. I understand that right now. I know leadership fatigue, and I understand grief. He lost his sister. And at this time, I mean, Moses, I mean, my goodness, these people complain, and I'd be like Moses. I want to hit something too, just give me a stick. I want to hit something so hard, So I get all of that. Moses is human, and Moses has lost his sister, and these people are on his last nerve. And God is good and God is great, but crap, Moses is fed up, and again, he just wants to hit something. And plus 40 years ago, he hit the rock. I mean, that was how you did it. I mean, Moses has been here before, but as true as all of that is, Moses is the leader. And again, it's the burden of leadership. You don't get to just throw a tantrum in front of the people. You don't get to say everything that you want to say. You don't get to voice every opinion that you have, because again, leaders have influence. And I ain't Moses, and I'm not the leader of anything. Woodburn Baptist Church is a great church to me, but I recognize I'm not the, Pope of the Catholic Church, or this ain't the Crystal Cathedral, but still I have influence, so I just can't, lose my temper in a staff meeting. I just can't embarrass a church member who gets something wrong. I mean, I always have to be aware of what I say and how it comes off and how people will perceive it, and also how this bears witness to who God is. I'm a pastor. I preach not just with my words, but with my life. And I'm not perfect. And I don't get it right most days, I would say, but I try to recognize, the burden that goes with leadership. And I think Moses has done good with this most days too, but this day is not his best day. It's disobedient. I mean, with obedience to God, to a holy God, the details matter. We've been going over this. I mean, our brains, want to just, shatter sometimes with the detail. I mean, yesterday we're doing the red heifer ritual. You got to drop, what was it? A hyssop branch, a some cedar wood and some, scarlet yarn, with the red heifer and burn it outside and all these details. And the point is you got to get them right. God's a holy God and you don't just get to do it the way you want. Even if you're the leader and especially if you're the leader, And so Moses is told to speak to the rock. He strikes it twice and then he says, must we bring water? I mean, he almost makes it sound like the power's coming from him. I don't know if that's reading too much into it, but that's how it strikes me, Must we bring water from this? Well, it's not you. You went to God. God told you where the water would come from. God told you how to access the water, but it's not your power, Moses. But in this moment, Moses just is off, And there are consequences to that. Even for leaders, there are consequences to their disobedience. And God just says, because you didn't trust me enough, to do my will my way, then you're not going to be the one to lead them into the promised land, And again, we'll talk about that more later. And then we already have talked about that. But those consequences seem harsh. But again, it seems like, well, that's such a small offense. But the offense isn't measured by, our standards of what makes a small or a great offense. The offense is against God's infinite holiness, And if God's holiness is infinite, then any offense is therefore infinitely, consequential. Again, you don't measure it by, what we consider large or small. The offense is against his holiness, and God's holiness is tremendous. Anyway, let's pick up here on Monday, all right? We'll pick up with verses 14 to 29. We're going to have to bury Aaron, and we'll finish out this chapter 20. So anyway, have a good weekend, you guys. If you don't have a church home, I'm starting a new series on Sunday here in the pulpit at Woodburn called God in the Gray, taking several weeks to look at different aspects, different issues, so to speak, moments where we sometimes feel like we need clarity from God. Things don't seem clear. Often we look to our own feelings to find clarity, and the point of this series is that feelings are not where you find clarity. We find clarity in our Father and in His Word. So Sunday I want to talk about depression, times of emotional fogginess when we just really, really need clarity from the Lord. How does He speak to us through that fog of depression? We'll talk about homosexuality. We'll talk about politics a little bit, and then also just when you're looking for God's will and trying to find His voice. So all these aspects of moments when we feel like it's foggy and we really need a clear word from God. And that's this series that starts Sunday, God in the Gray. So 8, 9:30, and 11 on Sunday morning. If I don't see you here live, then I will see you Monday morning, 10 o'clock.